Morrowind is a great game, and I'm sick and tired of people trashing it. And before you reach for the comment section and call me a Morrow boomer, I just played the game for the first time a couple years ago. I literally wasn't even born when this game came out. It's physically impossible for me to be any kind of boomer, alright? I'm in the Morrowind subreddit, embarrassing, I know. But I swear, bro, it's like every other post I see. Vivek City's so hard to navigate. Or, wow, look, Morrow boomers are so elitist. And you get the picture. Am I about to prove that second point correct? Let's not talk about that. Look, the majority of stuff on there is obviously promoting the game and whatnot, but I just find it interesting how it's only on the Morrowind community where I see posts and discussions blatantly ridiculing the game and its fandom get so much traction. You rarely, if ever, see that in the Skyrim or Oblivion communities. It's no secret that Morrowind's old. It's not got the best graphics, the combat system could use some work, it's a little janky, you get the point. But honestly, how bad is it? I'm going to try and prove to you today in this video that Morrowind in fact holds up really well to its successors and even does a lot of things better than them. I'm going to try and prove to you that it's not all true. I mean, obviously, some of it is. Just look at this shit.
He needs some milk!
What really matters when you make a video game? What makes a game good? I read a UI blurb once in a game called Software Inc., which called video games interactive art. And honestly, I couldn't think of a more perfect way to put it. They are interactive art. They're like a book you could jump right into and steer the way that you want it to go, or a movie that you can both watch and simultaneously be the main character in. If you play a game like Red Dead Redemption 2 and you tell me you don't feel a little badass riding your horse through the plains, or feel even a tiny smidge of awe as you look over the stunning scenery, I'd have to believe you are lying at least a little bit. I mean, come on. Look at those polygons. They're massaging my eyeballs right now. Are you telling me this visual doesn't even give you a little half chub? Obviously, every game has a different metric though, right? Sure, when you play a Paradox title, you don't exactly expect to be wowed by picturesque canyons and able to skin a 15-point buck like you're Arthur Morgan. Sure, okay, so let's say the groundwork here for defining what makes a good open-world RPG. You know, like what the Elder Scrolls games are. In my opinion, it starts with good world building. I don't want to leave the starting town and feel like I'm in some sort of barren wasteland with zero character, backstory, or visual appeal. Starfield. Then you want good writing. I want to really feel like the quest that I'm doing makes sense, the characters are interesting, and the results are tangible. Those ideas mesh well with point one and lead to what are the core of any good RPG. Another important thing to consider is the depth. How many systems are there to interact with that aren't just superfluous? How do factions in the world interact with each other? How are my actions reflected onto those factions and the characters that compose them? And do I have to make difficult choices between different outcomes, each with their own respective pros and cons? How much freedom do I have to become the kind of character that I want to become? Lastly, how does the game present itself? When you launch it up, does the soundtrack give you goosebumps? Do you get very excited to start a new character and dive back into this kind of breathing world? Or do you sigh at the thought of all the grinding that you're going to have to do? When you enter the game's notable towns and cities for the first time, do you gasp in shock at how grandiose they are? And are the game's outcomes, characters, and choices memorable? Now that we've established what we look for in a good RPG, let's look at how Morrowind handles those things. And to give it something to compare to, I'll be using Skyrim as a contrast to critique and differentiate with throughout the rest of the video, since it represents the direction that the Elder Scrolls series has gone, and it's the latest and most popular entry in the series. I'd compare Morrowind to Starfield, but I mean, come on, we all know that's low-hanging fruit. Now look, I just want to give a massive disclaimer here and say I love Skyrim. I'm going to say some very harsh things about it throughout the video, but just be aware I think it's a great game. I think Skyrim benefited the Elder Scrolls as a whole massively, and it was my first title and the one that I grew up on. I have several hundreds of hours, or even maybe over 1,000 in the world of Skyrim. So sure, I might have my problems with it, and that's what I'm about to detail, but overall I love it. With that out of the way, for starters, let's take a look at the world building. World building in Skyrim could have been so much better, and any real Elder Scrolls fans know that. Morrowind's renowned for its almost alien setting with freakish concepts brought to life like the Silt Strider, the Cliff Racer, the Nyx Hounds, Bone Walkers, or those terrifying Corpus zombies. The whole game gives off this otherworldly vibe, and when you step out of Satanin, you just feel like all bets are off. I'm sure everybody remembers when you had your first encounter with one of those fucking scribs outside Satanin. You literally just get off the boat and this little shit comes at you with lightning speed and starts violently assaulting you, and you're out here thrashing around trying to figure out how to connect the hit as it's paralyzing you. The point is, the fauna is wild. You can't deny that, and most importantly, it's creative. It's original. Bethesda didn't just rip this shit from the Tolkien playbook. Nah, this thing came straight off the Dimsdale Dimmadome, and the whole world is like that. Be so real right now. How many of you watching this have actually even played the game and learned anything about its world? Let me drop some knowledge and stick with me here. I'll try to be quick. We have a tribunal of narcissistic sociopaths who killed their best friend, or husband in one's case, thousands of years ago after fighting a race of dwarves that mysteriously vanished. Oh yeah, and they got their power from the heart of a literal dead god that they found in a volcano. Did I mention that they now run an authoritarian theocracy and use state-sanctioned slavery, violence, and a special caste of warrior priests called the Ordinators to maintain control? Their enemy, Dagoth-Ur, tried to stop them from killing their bestie Nerevar a couple thousand years back, but failed, and ended up becoming a super racist in the heart of a volcano that they all need to return to maintain their powers. Honestly, the main questline gets so much wilder than that, but we'll get back to that. A house system which promotes internal conflict, with 3 main houses ruling over the island of Vardenfell, one of which lives in giant dead crabs and prioritizes an honor-based warrior code, and another composed of psycho, introvert wizards that live in giant mushrooms and openly murder each other to advance the ranks, and then the other that basically acts as a colonial fleshlight for the pseudo-Roman colonizers of the setting, the Empire. Slavery, drugs, religious and ethnic division, racism, religious themes, societal commentaries, a complex history, and an extremely developed culture and subcultures, and more. The point I'm trying to make here is, this game has got some serious shit going on. The setting's alive, it's breathing, it might as well be eating a Big Mac right now. This game does not mess around on the point of delivering a real world that you could actually believe exists and feels lived in. Now, not every game needs to touch on these sorts of topics, but if you ask me, when a role-playing game does do that, it makes the setting not only feel so much more believable, but also more high stakes and memorable. And the game as a result ends up being far more high quality and gritty. You're just dropped in here, and the first thing that everyone does is take one look at you before calling you what we can only assume is the most heinous shit they can think of before telling you to piss off in their 3 packs of cigs a day and bottle of Jack voices. When you enter Vivec City for the first time, your jaw literally drops. I remember when I was messing around with the fast travel system, trying to figure out how to get from point A to point B, and I accidentally ended up in Vivec, and I was just in shock. The city is so ambitious for what they had at the time, man. You get lost in that city and you can't find your way around, and people hate that. Are you seriously telling me you've never gotten lost in real life in a new city? Because I sure have, and I have Google fucking Maps. Put me in Vivec City and I don't care. It's gonna take me a couple hours to figure it out. And that's okay. You hear me? Shh, that's okay. Not everything needs to be like Whiterun. Real cities aren't like that. Unless you live in a fake region of the world called the West Coast. I could go on and on about the world building in Morrowind for hours, honestly. I could make an entire video about that in and of itself. But the short of it is this. The world building in Morrowind is its biggest strength. And I promise you, if you can overlook some of the other gripes that you might have with the game and you value the setting in an RPG, just give it a chance. It won't disappoint. I mean, let's just talk about how they changed some of these things in Skyrim. Skyrim was mostly true to its lore descriptions before it came out. I'll give it that. They really could have expanded it though. Not only are none of the cities very ambitious, I mean, we literally have no equivalent to Oblivion's Imperial City or Morrowind's Vivec City, and before you think Skyrim simply doesn't have anything comparable, Whiterun is supposed to be a bustling metropolis. But the Nord pantheon could have also been expanded on, the culture could have been so much more, the history of the province could have been shown and experienced to a deeper extent. You get the point. Not every Elder Scrolls game has to be some sort of alien world like Morrowind was. All I'm saying is it's not unreasonable to at least expect some creativity beyond the original source material we had in the 90s and early 2000s. The reality of the situation is this. After Morrowind, Bethesda's opted to play it safe and just work with what they had, and Skyrim represents in a lot of ways this continual evolution towards a model which not only completely lacks any creativity whatsoever, but also strives to appeal to as wide an audience as humanly possible at the expense of people like you. Yes, you. If you're watching this video right now thinking, I love Skyrim, this guy's an idiot, Skyrim's so much better than Morrowind.
And I got news for you.
Still in the category of people that are being fucked over by this change in business strategy. Look at you sitting here watching some guy rant online about 2 games that came out over a decade ago. You're not a casual, you're not Bethesda's target audience anymore. You know who is? The guys that come home from work and play for half an hour on their console before putting the kids to bed and catching an early night in. People who saw that a game released on the side of a bus and decided to buy it for $70 without even knowing an iota of what the fuck it was about, before proceeding to spend 40 minutes in the tutorial figuring out their left from their right. That's Bethesda's target audience now, because they got money signs in their eyes. And even a dumpster fire like Starfield can rake in tens and millions of profits, and they don't need you or me to do it. You or me being people who care about a good game and actually learn something about the world and systems that make it up. I also want to state I don't have any problem whatsoever with casual gamers. What I have a problem with is the casualization of the entire market, including games like the Elder Scrolls that have no real reason to become casualized. Look, I'm going to be completely honest here. Morrowind's obviously old as far as games go. It's like a centenarian just sitting in the corner of the nursing home, shitting its pants all the time, completely senile, occasionally rearing its head when it hears about Babe Ruth or something. I don't know. It's old, you get the point. But how bad really is it? Because when I played it, it took about 2 minutes to install OpenMW, and not only did it run like butter, but it looked just fine to me, and I didn't have any issues with the UI or mechanics. One of the most common complaints I see concerning Morrowind is, the combat system is so bad. That's such a crazy statement in my opinion. It's actually shocking how prevalent it is, despite it holding not a drop of water. Allow me to explain to you the entire combat system that people spend hours complaining about online in a total of 10 seconds. You turn auto best attack on in settings, then hold the left mouse button to power up before releasing, or you're not going to do full damage. Your hit chance is then determined by your stamina and weapon skill. That's it. Wow, was that so hard? It's so simple to understand that honestly I'll never be able to process how it's even considered a valid critique to begin with. But I don't want to get too far off topic here. The point that I'm making is honestly, just like the combat system, Morrowind as a whole is not nearly as dated and anachronistic as people make it out to be. If you're the kind of person who cares more about the way that a game looks than the way that it plays, and, most importantly for an RPG, the freedom and depth of the world that it takes place in as opposed to its appearance, then by all means, I can't change your mind. I personally don't mind reading a bit and seeing some older graphics and menus in exchange for a vastly improved experience in virtually every other regard, but that's just me. Look, I'll be the first to admit that Skyrim looks nicer, it runs nicer than vanilla Morrowind does, it feels less stiff, and it has physics, which Morrowind doesn't have at all. Those are all products of better technology and funding. But the fact is, that's kind of not what makes an RPG good. I'm going to blow your mind right now and tell you something you might not have even considered. Skyrim isn't even really an RPG, and therein lies 90% of my issues with it. It really should be marketed more as an action-adventure game, because that's honestly a way more accurate way to describe what it is. Have you ever noticed that aside from the Civil War questline, there's not a single meaningful choice that you ever make in Skyrim? The Civil War is the only impactful choice you make in the entire game, which is probably why people still debate it so fiercely today. Seriously, aside from one isolated case with the choice of destroying or preserving the Dark Brotherhood, which is a joke by the way, since one is heavily incentivized and the other is inarguably worse, there's not a single meaningful decision that you make in the entire game. The only other decision I can even think of off the top of my head is deciding to kill Sadia or let her live, the outcome of which is effectively the same regardless of your choice. Every dialogue option is some variant of yes but edgy/funny, or I'll do this later. Does that formula remind you of anything? I guess what I'm trying to say here is, yeah, Morrowind's old. It's ancient by gaming standards. That's no secret. But unlike Skyrim, there's a lot more freedom. Has anyone in Skyrim ever really pissed you off and you were like, alright, this guy's finished, before you beat him over the skull with your Daedric Warhammer, just to end up watching him wiggle around in the ground in that bullshit essential NPC animation? Yeah, not in Morrowind, baby. Do you hate Vivek? You can literally break into his palace and obliterate him. Nothing is stopping you. You could rock up to Caius Casady's crib and tear him a new asshole and the game will just shrug and be like, oh, but you severed the thread of prophecy. Are you sure you want to do that? Yeah, I do. And if I ruin my game because I can't read or I didn't pay attention to that message, that's my fault. And that, kids, is called the consequences of your actions. Imagine a world where you could murk Ulfric or Tullius on day one and just end the whole Civil War questline, or walk into Markarth and dome the Silverthorns. The best example of what that would look like is Fallout New Vegas. And while that's a whole other video in and of itself, and Morrowind doesn't come close to New Vegas in terms of its reactivity to your actions, it at least allows you to take those actions, which is one step better than its successors. The first time I ever played Morrowind, I decided to be a Dunmer wizard, because I'd heard of the Telvanni mages and I was like, damn, that sounds sick. I want to live in a giant fucking mushroom. So I traveled to Balmora and I decided I'd join the Mages Guild to skill up in the meantime. Makes sense, right? Later I found out that they had beef with House Telvanni and I was barred from entry because of my decision earlier to join the Mages Guild. That's how an RPG should be. You can't also be in Telvanni, Redoran, and Hlaalu all at once. It's just nonsensical. You can't join the Dark Brotherhood because you're already in the Morag Tong. Guess what games totally ignore the idea of clashing factions that have exclusive mutual membership? Bingo, Starfield and Skyrim. The most egregious example of this is in Skyrim being able to join the Imperial Legion, then promptly turn around and kill the Emperor. Because that totally makes sense. Starfield is even worse when it comes to this. You can join the Crimson Fleet, destroy the United Colony's flagship Vigilance, and then literally walk around on New Atlantis with zero consequence, and even join the ranks of and advance in the UC Vanguard. Jeez, this is what I'm talking about when I say that the casualization hurts these games. Todd wants you to be able to do everything on one character so bad that you end up having no reason to play the game again once you finish it, upon realizing there's zero replayability, because you've already done everything that you can on one save file. Once again, if Starfield was marketed as an action-adventure or an open-world first-person shooter, I wouldn't even be able to criticize it for these things, but it's not. It, like Skyrim, is marketed as an RPG because that's what people want and what Bethesda's known for. But yet, Bethesda loves to tease us with what we want before handing us something completely void of any of the features that we ask for. Now, for clarification, I think Skyrim's a million times better than Starfield. There's no comparison there for me. I think that Starfield is just the culmination of a trend that begins with Oblivion, which is the simplification and sanitization of those games. Skyrim does it, and while it's disappointing, it's palatable for most hardcore Elder Scrolls fans, but I'll put money down right here, right now, that Elder Scrolls 6 will go the way of Starfield if Bethesda doesn't get its act together. Not only does Morrowind have more reactivity and depth in that way, but it's also just bigger. Yeah, you heard me. Morrowind is bigger than Skyrim in a lot of ways, and I'm talking weapons, spells, a spell creation system, NPCs, joinable factions, skills, spell effects, and creatures. And you know what? I can just hear you now. Oh, but Omniberg, bigger number doesn't equal better. You're right, but, and that's a huge thick-ass but, let me answer your statement with a question. Can we honestly tell ourselves here, and I mean, come on, we're all adults here, we're all big boys here, can we honestly tell ourselves that the lower amount of everything is so high in quality that it justifies cutting so much content? No, not in my opinion. And for all the critiques that I've seen of people saying, oh, but characters in Morrowind aren't engaging or deep at all, they also conveniently failed to mention that neither are they in Skyrim. Certainly not any more so. Do you know why Serana is so popular among Skyrim players? Let me give you a hint. It's not because the fan base is primarily virgins who've never felt the touch of a woman. While that may be true, it's actually because she's the only NPC in the entire game that has any sort of fleshed out backstory and can simultaneously be interacted with to any satisfying extent. Do you know why Camelworks has to make a 3-hour video every time Jarl Balgruuf farts in the fucking wind? Because no one else in this game tells you anything. No one's story's ever expanded on. They're all cardboard cutouts. And that's not something Skyrim does any better than Morrowind just because it has voice acting and better graphics. For all the things that we as players have lost access to since the release of Morrowind, we just can't say we got so much of an increase in quality as to justify that. I guess what I'm trying to say here is, bring back levitation, Papa Todd. Now I want to touch on the questlines, and I'll cover both the main and the faction questlines. The main questline in Morrowind just fucking blows Skyrim's out of the water. I'm sorry, it's not even a contest, and you're on something if you think that it is. Let's compare them. One questline has you travel all over the province to gain the approval of tribes, nobles, and gods, whilst collecting ancient relics and striving to fulfill an enigmatic prophecy for which you were handpicked by the Emperor himself. You must do this to defeat a several thousands-year-old enemy who was also your friend in a past life while simultaneously becoming immortal, bringing an end to the rule of 3 living gods, and marking the fall of a theocratic slave state that was birthed out of sin and hubris, ultimately fulfilling your destiny, much to the chagrin of the many who looked down on you and stood in your way in the process, while simultaneously belittling and doubting you. Oh, and did I mention that the guy on the mountain, Dagoth was not just your friend in a past life, but also your right-hand man who also tried to stop your murder, and now has complex political motivations regarding his plans, and has strayed so far from your original values that despite his pleas for you to rule beside him, you can't without causing irreparable damage to all sentient life. He's incredibly anti-empire and a Dunmer supremacist who's engineered a disease which turns people into mindless zombies and wants to banish the mongrel dogs of the empire, as he puts it, from Morrowind before ultimately presiding over a Dunmer ethno-state which he wants to rule over the entire continent. And in the other game, a dragon who exists solely to destroy the world and was already stopped once returns and begins resurrecting other dragons to serve under him with the purpose of eating the world. Yeah, because that's an extremely complex objective which has a lot of moral conflicts within it and is totally not a cop-out or anything to avoid writing something interesting or thought-provoking. I know Skyrim's questline is technically deeper, with the dragon cults and the blades, but that's pretty much it. There's no inner conflict, Alduin's not a developed antagonist, and the blades are honestly fucking annoying. The questline just isn't memorable. That's why you get so many jokes online about, oh, when you're 30 hours in and forgot about the main quest. People love to spin that as a positive, like the game's just so deep that the main quest is an afterthought. Which might be true, but it doesn't change the fact that the main questline is just boring, and it's completely non-innovative in any way, shape, or form. Regarding faction questlines, there's a pattern there too. Ever seen the memes about joining the College of Winterhold and casting a single spell before continuing on to go wield a great axe for the rest of the entire questline? Yeah, it's hilarious, I'm not gonna lie. It's so funny though because of how ridiculous it is. Why the hell is that something you can do? Why can you be the Archmage of Skyrim's most prestigious College of Magic whilst not being able to cast a single spell outside of flames? I mean, it's stupid. Furthermore, why do you have to be the leader of every faction? It begins to feel a little silly when your resume includes being the Archmage, the Legate, Thieves Guild Master, Dark Brotherhood Listener, Dragonborn, Harbinger, and Leader of the Dawn Guard. Even Bethesda agrees with me here that that's just weird. They changed it in Starfield, and if you ask me, it's one of the few changes that's for the better. Questlines in Morrowind require you to meet certain thresholds in order to advance. You can't just continue to advance in the ranks of the Telvanni or the Mages Guild, for example, if you're not skilled enough in magic. It's just not going to happen. Similarly, if you haven't become a good enough fighter, you're not going to be climbing the ranks of the Fighters Guild or House of Redoran. Why is that not the case in Skyrim? It's silly, and when you combine it with the fact that you can join every single faction with no conflicting interest, you begin to realize something. Every playthrough is literally the exact same, and it's just becoming a matter of which questline to do in which order before eventually probably becoming a stealth archer. Maybe part of that is because magic doesn't scale very well in vanilla Skyrim, and the whole system is pretty inflexible. There's no spell creation system, and there's only 3 damage types: shock, fire, and frost. You can't create your own spells, you cannot fly, and you can't become an all-powerful wizard who uses his immense magical prowess to compensate for his lack of skills in other areas like you could in Morrowind, for example, where you could use spells to unlock doors and teleport vast distances with Mark and Recall, which, for God's sake, I wish they'd never removed that. For those of you who think fast travel's not a thing in Morrowind, just bust out Mark and Recall and Almsivy Intervention and you can literally teleport across the entire world in lore-friendly and immersive ways, and we never should have lost that function. But regardless, I think you get my point. Not only is there more choice, background, and logic behind Morrowind's questlines alongside simply more of them, but they also have requirements and branching choices which overall give the player a much more vast sense of agency. Why would you label a game as a role-playing game and then rob them of the ability to affect the world that they're in any way? Where's the role-playing when I approach Brynjolf and Riften for the 1000th time and say the same thing because there's no other options on how to approach that situation? Where's the role-playing and choice behind having to do the exact same thing every single time you pick up the game because you simply don't have any other options? This is the last part of the video, and I'm sure it's going to get the most flack. But look, I just think this needs to be said. It's not that bad. I'm talking about the reading, the lack of fast travel, the combat system, the graphics, all of it. This is totally subjective, but at the end of the day, I'm just saying that signs of a game's age and a little fewer creature comforts, some of which you can just fix with mods, aren't that bad. If you actually enjoy role-playing games and these are deal breakers for you, then fine, that's not a problem. But you can't just go around citing them as reasons why Morrowind isn't good because you don't want to use your third grade reading skills and figure out where you're going without having a floating marker to constantly gravitate towards. Some of these things are even beneficial if you ask me. How many unique nighttime views and experiences on the road did you miss out on in Skyrim because of the fast travel system? The end result of the differences here are, quite honestly, that you end up being far more immersed and present in the game and the quests that you're doing. I was shocked the first time I played Morrowind because I felt so much more in it, so much more invested and just attentive to what was going on because my mind had to fill in the gaps and do the work that the game was no longer doing for me. I had to figure out what the hell southeast of this city actually meant, or what the hints being dropped in a quest were from the reading that I did. Now, I'm not gonna lie, some of those directions are straight up misleading and confusing as hell, and for that, Google's your friend. But for the most part, it's unproblematic and makes for a far more unique and engaging experience than what you get in something like Skyrim. I think this all comes back to something which studios care less and less about, but what makes franchises like Dungeons & Dragons so popular, which is imagination. Obviously, a game needs to illustrate things for you and provide you with enough concrete things to interact with, but having the right amount of wiggle room for the player's imagination to take over and let their mind go to work can really do wonders for a game and allow the player to feel so much more a part of the world that they're in when they play it. Why do you think platforms like AI Dungeon and Novel AI and the rise of procedural storytelling and generation are becoming so massive? Now, as far as the graphics and the combat goes, I've already expressed it's not a deal breaker for me personally. But if it is for you, but you'd be willing to try the game if they weren't problems, I would encourage you to just change it up with some mods. Morrowind still has a thriving and strong modding community all these years later, which is a testament to how good a game it is and how strong a following it's built. And it's extremely easy to install OpenMW alongside a few quality of life and graphics mods to modernize the game. I've seen some people manage to make it look incredibly visually impressive, and while I haven't personally felt the need to go down that road, I'm aware it's very clearly possible. I think that's it for me today, guys. I could have made the video a lot longer, frankly, and I'm sure I missed some things, but I think it's long enough, and I prefer to make something a little bit more palatable. Let me know what you think down the road, and if you disagree with me, feel free to tell me why. I appreciate you a ton for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.